Yes. So,
Yes,
good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joe from Associate Senecora, the coordinator of the FoodBack project. Today we're here with Nainawa from Jordan, who will be interviewing Benedetta and Lenni on the
yes,
topic of our talk. Just briefly about the project, and then I will pass the ball to Nainawa.
yes.
The
Hello,
project
everyone.
is about youth entre. Go,
Yes,
you can
hello,
go.
everyone. Welcome to this Foodback online talk. We are just getting started, so while people are joining, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're tuning in from. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. You can drop your question in the chat anytime. We will try to answer as many as possible at the end. Be respectful, please, and keep the chat constructive. And there will be a Q&A segment from your side, so please keep your microphones muted during the discussion. This session will last about 45 minutes and will be streamed live on social media. So, a quick reminder about the FoodBack project. This is an Erasmus Plus capacity building project designed to empower young people in entrepreneurship and sustainable food systems. Through studies, visits, training, and local workshops, participants have been developing business ideas that merge food, sustainability, and social innovation. So today, yes, yeah. So today we are diving to the challenges and barriers women face in entrepreneurship, especially the invisible ones. While women-led businesses are on the rise, many hidden obstacles still prevent women from reaching their full potential in the entrepreneurial world. So, to help us navigate this conversation, we are joined by two incredible experts with decades of experience in gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. So, first of all, Benedetta Magri has been working on gender equality, women's empowerment, and non-discrimination for over 30 years. She has trained institutions, NGOs, business organizations, and trade unions worldwide, and has been a high-level strategic advisor on gender equality for the Europe Commission. Today, she continues to mentor and support young activities working from an intersectional feminist perspective. And we also have today Lenny George has more than 3 decades of experience working towards equality, celebrating diversity, and advocating for inclusive practices. She has worked with over 70 countries and 170 nationalities, providing training and coaching to UN agencies. Lenny has received international award for her contributions to youth employment services and peace building efforts in Kosovo. So, welcome Benedetta and Lenny. To start, I'd love to hear from both of you. Could you share a bit about your backgrounds and what inspired you to dedicate your careers to gender equality and women empowerment?
Shall I start?
Let's start with Benedetta first, if you would like.
I don't want to kind of take so much time on this because I think there's other things we want to discuss, but maybe one thing that could be said is that what inspired me was that I personally experience how inequitable the world of work is. As a young woman, I started, as many of my age, a very nice education path because at the time, education in Europe and in Italy was free, much cheaper than today, actually. Things have gotten worse than better. And then when I entered, and it was all fine, I felt I was okay. And then when I entered the labor market and I entered the world of work, I realized all of a sudden that it wasn't as nice and rosy as I thought. And that's when I started to struggle. I don't want to enter into the details, but basically I was able to bring in my feminist activism background into the work that I was doing when I joined the International Training Center of the ILO, which is a UN agency. And so somehow I entered into the world of women's rights in the world of work, specifically in the world of work and in economic activities. And so I did many, many years doing that, and then broaden, of course, the scope of my work into intersectionality, so also covering topics related to the inclusion of, looking at women's empowerment from an intersectional perspective, which means looking at the fact that not all women are the same, and there are different ways in which women can access resources and flourish in the world of work. And not only women, and looking also at the gender dimensions, which looks at different elements of discrimination. And then further, then I went into disability and looking at how disability impacts again on the opportunities at work. And then there's many, many other things, but I think that basically started all from a very personal, let's say, experience, and how I wanted to make it into something I could use to transform the world I was working in. So I pass it on to Lenni. Thank you. Thank
you.
I guess for me, the starting point was actually a different route in terms of social justice. So I was a very young political activist. I think my first conscious political action was aged about 14 years old, when a fascist racist was handing out leaflets in my local town in Britain. And coming from an immigrant family, I was kind of horrified, tore it up and threw it in his face. And that kind of started really then a kind of a lifetime of political activism. But when I entered the world of work, in many ways similar to Benedetta, I started to see some of the more invisible barriers that faced women. And it's a bit like why fish can't see water. Somehow you're so inside it that you don't realize what is actually around you and what is going on. So my master's degree was in barriers to women's career development, and that really helped me take a very serious look at what was happening to women and men in different ways in the world of work. And I guess it grew from there, and then working within the UN, and then leaving the UN to set up my own company and working as a woman entrepreneur, and wanting to support and help other entrepreneurs, women and men and young people.
Yes, thanks for sharing. And let's begin by discussing the importance of understanding gender in the context of entrepreneurship. Benedetta, with your extensive experience in gender equality, why do you think it's important to discuss entrepreneurship with a gender perspective?
Okay, so first of all, can I just ask, I wanted to see how many people we have on board, just to get an idea. Is that 4 or 5? So is that what we have at the moment?
No, at the moment we are 21 people.
21 people. Okay, it would have been good to know if there are some men in the class. Can we, I don't know, is there any way in which we can find out if there are boys?
I can guess that there definitely are. There's 1, 2.
Okay, great.
At least 7.
Okay, so let's get the numbers. So we have 21 people, 7, it means 2/3 are women and 1/3 is men. You know, this is a professional deviation I have. I always count because counting matters, especially for visibility. So I've put together a bit of data about what we would call women's entrepreneurship, and I'm going to show it to you now. So we can say that, first of all, what I can say is that since when I joined, let's say at work, I mean, I was a feminist. I had my feminist manifesto when I was in primary school, but there was something like, because it was so strong at the time. But when I joined the UN, it was just before the UN Beijing Conference on Women and Peace, which was 1995, a really landmark, changing completely let's say the policies at national and international and national level in relation to gender equality. And since then, there has been a lot of talk about how to promote women's entrepreneurship. And why is that so? It's because in reality, entrepreneurship and self-employment are seen as an important element to include women in the economic and as an important tool for women's economic empowerment. Because as you certainly all know, one of the main problems in terms of inequalities is that if you don't have economic power, you are unequal. You don't have, let's say, enough negotiating power to negotiate. Exactly, you don't have enough power to negotiate equality. So economic empowerment has been really one very important strategy for equality, I would say, certainly since 1995. So we've seen a lot of these programs, women's entrepreneurship development, and one of the things that we can say is that, yes, there have been a lot of improvements. There has been growth. We can say that, for instance, I've looked just at the latest data, and women's startup activity since the early 2000s, we have globally, instead of 6%, so 6 women out of 100 women would start up an activity. Now we have an average, global average of 10%. And the same if we look at business ownership, women, female-owned enterprises rose from 4% to 6%. Then we also have other less positive aspects, though. For instance, the OECD has made very recent surveys, and it shows that, yes, we do have a growth. We do have entrepreneurship as an important strategy for women's access to employment, but in reality, women businesses tend to be much smaller and to have lower productivity rates. Just to give you an example, in Italy, on average, women-owned enterprises are 60% less productive than men's-owned. So there is a big gap there.
Benedetta, but also, what are some of the biggest invisible barriers that women entrepreneurs face today?
Oh, yes, of course. But I'm talking about now. I'm talking about the fact that today, if you look at the way in which women companies are organized, they are small and they are concentrated in certain sectors that are at low productivity. When we look at the agricultural sector, that's what we are talking about today, we can see that only 29% of farms across the EU are owned by women and managed by women. There are important differences. So you will notice, for instance, that in the Netherlands and in Germany and in Norway, only 10% of farms are owned by women, whilst in Latvia and Lithuania, it's 45%. So there are big differences. In Italy, it's around 30%. So what is this? Let's have a look at the invisible barriers. Why is it important to look at the invisible barriers? Because in spite of all these programs, in spite of the political agenda being so strong, we still see that there are elements that are not quite right. So looking at what you've asked, we can say that there are certain, let's say, hidden elements. And here I'm talking on the basis of the experience I had personally on a project that looked into the influence of gender stereotypes in access to for women into small businesses. We looked at the 27 member states, so the EU member states, all of them, including the UK, because at the time Brexit had not happened yet. And what was interesting to see is that in spite of cultural differences, in spite of historical differences and legal differences, there are certain what we call meta stereotypes. So there are certain received ideas about what women and men can do that are influencing everywhere the way in which then you can access and control productive resources. The first one is about leadership. So across the board, we can say that women are still not considered good enough as leaders. We can say that things are changing. Of course, we have more and more women leaders, but this kind of embedded idea that you are less credible as a leader than a man is still there. And it is important to recognize this because it's not visible. Nobody will tell you if you ask, are men better leader than women? It's very often, no, of course, we're all equal. But then you look at reality, I just made thank you, my Mahmoud, I don't know. So if you look at reality, for instance, we have now 30%, we said 30% farm in Italy are owned by women. Women are very active in innovation in agricultural sector. Not only, women are on average better educated. So women farmers in Italy have much higher levels of education than men farmers. And then I just looked into Confagricoltura out of curiosity. And do you know how many women are president of the regional chapter of Confagricoltura in Italy? The 19 chapters? Would you guess? 0%. So you see the leadership stereotype somehow influences. Then let's go ahead and look at others, because then we could talk about it for a week. But let's touch the second one. The second one is related to skills. There are still a lot of biases in relation to what is good and what is bad for women, for girls, first of all, and then women in terms of technical capacities. So there is this idea that girls are kind and they are caring and they are good for whatever is related to the care sector, the unpaid care economy, and whatever is related to health and beauty, and partly also hospitality. So for instance, this reflects very clearly when we talk about agriculture, again, looking at the Italian case study, you have the majority, not majority, but the very high numbers of women who own farms are actually managing agritourism, so agritourism, which includes hospitality, which is a closer sector to what this is more traditional for women. Whilst you will see
we will talk about these details, but now let's talk about the significant challenge that women face in accessing resources, which are critical for businesses' growth. So let's talk with Lenni. With your extensive experience working globally on diversity and inclusion, women often struggle to access funding and business network compared to men. Why is this still the case?
Yeah, I think as Benedetta's been laying the groundwork there, that what we see is that there are still existing stereotypes about what women can do and cannot do, and what is suitable for women to do. And that is perpetuated through societal norms, through family, through community, but also becomes a part of our world of work and business as well. So we live with those stereotypes. And part of those stereotypes are still directing women to make certain choices about their education, their skills development. We also talk about kind of just going back a little bit in terms of the patriarchal organization of most of our societies. One of the direct consequences of that is access to land, for example. So if land is generally inherited by the eldest son or divided by the sons, and we've got some of the data around women's ownership of land across Europe. I think we've got some of that here to share with you. But land is a really important, in many ways, it's collateral for accessing finances. It's capital for setting and starting up your business. It impacts on the size and the nature of your business, and particularly if you're in agro-based businesses, the amount of land that you've actually got to work on and work with. And so access to land has a massive influence on many other choices that you can make. So if you don't have that collateral, that land, and if you don't have the percentage of that, Ben, have you got the figures there for that?
You just said it, for instance, it's like 10%.
Yeah. So women's land ownership is around about 10%. something like that. You can see how that has a knock-on effect of many other things.
In the UK, 16%.
Yeah, 16%. And, you know, and that's like, I can't.
Yes, Lenni, we talk about business. Also, what structural or systemic issues make it harder for women to succeed in business?
Mhm. Well, clearly one of the things that's up on the screen there is reproductive responsibilities, and so women, we know a massive part of our work is looking after, and whether that's bringing up, having children, looking after the children in the family, whether it's increasingly these days looking after elder family members, but most of that work, more than 80% of that work, falls onto the shoulders of women, which means that we're also impacted then on the amount of time we have to set up to run our business. So if you see at the bottom of the screen there, and one other thing that's really important actually is systemic gender-based violence, which really is really an invisible barrier that absolutely impacts on the decisions that women can make about where they can work, how they can work, if they can do this on their own. And it's very rarely talked about in the world of work. We kind of tend to deal with gender-based violence as a very separate kind of thing. It's only done over there. But in reality, and I'm pretty sure every woman in this room will have made decisions for herself about, is that safe for me to do that? And so will I do that on the basis of that? It does have a significant effect. So all of these things, that there's no one thing to say it's this or it's that, but if you start to roll all of these things in together, you can see that those things, those historical things, I'm talking long-term historical things, you know, thousands of years of history are kind of catalyzed in this. But that impacts on agency. So as women, the choices that we can make and the freedoms that we have. And that's those invisibilities. Sometimes there are other things that are imposed upon us, but there are also things that we impose upon ourselves as those barriers. So can I act? Do I fulfill the rights that I've been given? Do I feel that I'm legitimate, or am I a fraud or an imposter in this world of work or owning a business? Clearly it impacts on the time that we have available to put our effort into running a business or establishing a business. And clearly it affects our choices around mobility and our capacity to move. But I think maybe another way of looking at this is that you can't really think about any of these things as one individual thing. You have to look at the whole ecosystem and what happens within the ecosystem. So the little diagram that I've got here really tries to capture some of that. So if you see it at the center of that, there's something about my individual development and essentially my individual agency, my capacity to make choices about what I do, how I do it. Do I start a business? Do I look for paid employment? Do I take time out to bring up a family? Or do I spend a lot of time looking after my older relations? So that individual agency is at the core of that, but it is based on a whole range of other things. So what do organizations say is acceptable for women to do? As I mentioned before, my master's research, actually, two of the most interesting barriers, invisible barriers that I found for women's progression through their careers. The first was the idea that a manager, any manager, could be part-time. And that had a massive impact. So it wasn't a direct discrimination saying, oh no, women, you know, you're not as good a manager as a man. Of course it wasn't. Nobody would dream of saying that, I hope. But in reality, people, when they were recruiting managers, could not imagine a manager working part-time. Now, many women have had to choose to work part-time because of the other responsibilities they have and the lack of time. So you can see how that has a direct impact on a woman both deciding to make that choice, I want to be a manager, or I don't want to be a manager because I haven't got 60 hours a week outside of the home to spend in the work environment. So that was one big thing. And then the other thing was that a part of the socialization that we as women face often is in the service of others. And so very often the women that I interviewed would say, well, it's not the right time to leave the team. And I maybe I'll wait another year or so when things are more stable for everybody else, and then I can go. So they would often put their own aspirations and desires behind serving their work team. And a third little thing that was very interesting is when women were interviewed, they often talked about what we had achieved in terms of their teams, whereas men tended to talk about what I have achieved. And so they looked like stronger candidates because they were using that personal pronoun, but I have achieved this, I have done that, whereas women tend to be more inclusive and sharing around that. So they were just some of the things that the organizations impact, but also the community. So, how well are we in our networks? Are we visible in our networks? What does our network provide for us, and what do we provide for it? Are there opportunities to lead within those networks, to change what is happening, to change some of the paradigms? Then
Yes, Lenny, thank you so much. Now let's focus on women's role in the agri-food sector, who women play a crucial role, but often lack decision-making power. Benedetta, in the agri-food sector, women play a crucial role, yet they often lack decision-making power. Why? Please explain.
Well, I think it's quite obvious in the sense that, I mean, I would have to, I don't work in the agri-food industry. So what I can say is, looking at numbers and looking at reports, it's quite clear that, again, we need to go back to certain very basic reasons and fundamental reasons. The first one is, again, the fact that leadership, the agri-food sector has been traditionally what we would say in technical term, male dominated, with a very strong macho culture. Things are changing, but they are changing at a very slow pace because there is not an understanding that it's a matter of changing the whole mentality. Of course, I was trying to say before, since 1995, we have these little drops of gems given to women so that you can have a little bit of money to run your little food garden, or basically for very small micro entrepreneurial activities that are based and are offered for, let's say, livelihoods, basically, rather than real entrepreneurship. But there is a lack of education for women and men to accept that women can be as an entrepreneur, as leaders as men. So it is really a matter of tackling those stereotypes at a deeper level. Unfortunately, I have to admit, really starting at the education and even before, because even if let's say also, it's a matter of, when you say why there aren't enough women leaders, the question would be, which leadership are we talking about? Which models of leadership are we talking about? The models of leadership that are winning in today's economies are leaderships that are based on the idea of competition, of power over other people, and basically they are based on a very patriarchal approach to leadership and to how work relations should be. We can then talk about social justice and we can talk about all these nice things, but in reality, if everyday working relations are based on this type of imbalances, women are not going to make it. So it's a matter also of really changing mentalities around leadership. And then, of course, also to use mentorship. There are many strategies that we can talk about.
I think that in the agro-food sector, I think there are four kind of very clear areas that we want to look at. One is lending bias in agriculture.
Yeah.
And that significantly affects women. Women get 30% less financing than men. Land ownership imbalance, which we've already mentioned, obviously is a very severe root cause that has an impact right the way through. Restricted agricultural networks, as Benedetta said, if women aren't participating in those networks and aren't leading in some of those networks, then we'd remain invisible in the networks when it comes to making choices and decisions that impact on women's lives and women's businesses. And the last one is biased assessment processes, where agriculture investment applications from women entrepreneurs are evaluated with greater scrutiny regarding risk factors and potential for growth. And that was based on some research. That's not just a kind of a fanciful idea.
I want to add something
Yeah,
about land
please.
size, but
Yeah.
I think this is also an interesting data is land size. So the ownership of, if you have very small farms, there is a very, very clear example in a gender analysis of, and then well, in a gender analysis of the European agriculture, the most recent European agricultural policy that is providing for subsidies to farmers and youth farmers. The interesting finding is that because women tend to have smaller farms, they were not entitled. Now they are changing it, but this is a very clear example of what we call technically indirect discrimination. You're not discriminating women per se, but you are excluding from subsidies those who have farms that are smaller than a certain number of hectares, and automatically, because women tend to be concentrated there, you are excluding women. So this is, when we're talking about gender analysis and the importance to understand that, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're not talking about just dividing female and male, but looking at those who does what and who gets what in reality. So this is also a very important, having the capacity to understand how in policies and how policies that are designed for a certain group and on the basis of the interests of very certain more powerful groups of people can be useless for others. And this doesn't touch only, of course, women, but it touches also small landowners. It touches also maybe people with migrant origin. So it's
Young entrepreneurs.
certain types of young entrepreneurs. So it's I think that's another element I wanted to add.
Yeah.
Yes, Benedetta, also, what is the are specific challenges women face in creating sustainable food businesses?
Well, you want to add it?
Well,
Maybe,
I think we've covered probably most of it. I think underrepresentation in agricultural leadership is one, because that means the impact of policy doesn't necessarily take into account the different needs that women business owners might have. I think technical training gaps, and research has shown there that women have less access to specialised agricultural training. Policy disadvantage we mentioned goes hand in hand with leadership and networking, and we're still living with the cultural stereotypes that they still continue to be perpetuated in terms of women's roles in farming and the agro businesses.
Maybe I could add to that if you look at secondary school, istituti agrari, for instance, in Italy, but not only, and also university level, agrarian studies, they tend to be male dominated. So there is still technical schools in general in Europe tend to be dominated by boys. So this is obviously creating challenges to women. So these are the kind of barriers that women would face, because you wouldn't have a very specific technical knowledge. Then you may start it again. You may have women who have done other studies, or women who are doing biology, women. That's also interesting to see that you have women who have higher levels of education, like university level education, and maybe very, very innovative in their businesses, but they don't have that background of agricultural studies. So that's another possible challenge that we could count on.
Yes.
And of course, the family and care responsibility, because this is really something that cuts across. I've heard some interviews to the what is called Confagricoltura Donna, and this is something that is still impacting on women's lives so much. We can't believe it, that it was still there, but it is a very, very major element, not having accessible childcare facilities and affordable childcare facilities, not having accessible and quality and affordable and safe transportation is also a very, very important element, not only for women in outside Europe, but also in Europe itself. And those choices are made on, many choices are made on this.
I think very telling in a country like Italy, where there's a real negative growth rate in terms of births. So, Italy's saying we need to have more children, but still the policies aren't in place to support choices in the family that mean that women and men get opportunities to share bringing up children in the families. And I say that in a sense that what Benedetta and I aren't interested in is kind of replacing one set of winners and losers with another set of winners and losers. So what we actually want is for better policy development that actually benefits everybody, and in that recognises the historical unlevel playing field that women have had to contend with when they're accessing into business or working in this particular sector. And I think that's what we'll kind of move
Absolutely.
on to look at in the final part of our presentation.
Yes, let's now shift to discussing the strategies that can help overcome these barriers and create a more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. Benedetta, what are some key strategies women entrepreneurs can use to navigate these obstacles?
I think that we can, I'll start and then I'll pass it on to you. I think we can look at, let's say, two, and this is very much the strategy of the policy of the European Union and the strategy that has been advocated for the last 25 years. We'll see what the actual and present geopolitical environment will still allow us to do, but that's what has been agreed by everyone for the last 30 years. So we're talking about two, let's say, main strategies. One would be to really focus on supporting women as a group, so having women-specific initiatives. As I said before, if these are not embedded in broader level change strategies, they have very little impact. So, of course, it is important. It is important, for instance, to intervene or provide opportunity for women to change their self-perceptions. And I think Lenni is going to talk about that. It's important to make sure that there are funds allocated for those women who may be in a kind of more disadvantaged situation because of historical reasons, and that's fine. But what is really important is to be aware, and when we're talking about women you asked me what to navigate, women to navigate, I would say women to advocate for higher level changes, to advocate for, and this is what has been done, for instance, with the gender analysis of the agricultural policy of the European Union, making sure that there is, first of all, visibility of the differences. And visibility is done through appropriate collection of data, which is not just about how many men and how many women, but it's gender analysis, which means understanding these men and women, what are they doing, what do they have access to, who controls the resources, who benefits. Is this only about women and men, female and male, but is it also about other people who may not conform to traditional gender roles, and for people who have different, and how does that impact on them? So having a much, much broader capacity to say, at least to analyze data in that perspective. Another element is really to look at how these policies can change when we're talking about the overall enabling environment. So advocating for better transport in rural areas, and really understanding or better education services, because it's very easy to say you go in the middle of the countryside and do your little thing, but then you're lost and you don't know what to do with children, you don't know what to do with your relatives. I mean, these are the issues that, by the way, are not just impacting on women, but they are impacting on men as well, particularly today that luckily there is more and more awareness on men on the need to change gender relations. So I think that these are some of the possibilities. I'd like then to ask Lenni to focus on what can be done at a more individual level, not so much on women as a group, but on entrepreneurs to change these mentalities, because she has quite interesting perspective to provide. If you agree,
if that's okay. I think some of the research that we've been doing within our company, the Development Alchemists, is really trying to understand what happens to micro and small business owners. And one of the things that we realize is that when you are a micro business owner or a small business owner, you are your business. So if you don't feel well today, your business doesn't feel well today. If you don't believe in yourself and your capacity, if you have imposter syndrome, or you feel like a fraud, or you don't have role models, then that affects how you think about yourself, and that affects how you think about your business. We see today many women's businesses, they kind of often they stop before they have the chance to grow. So they start sometimes as livelihood activities, bringing in a bit of money activities, doing something on the side of doing everything else, and don't get the chance to transform because those people, those women, don't feel that they have the right to turn it into a business, that they have the right to deny what they have to do at home and looking after the family or make changes there. So the model looks at 4 different aspects. So we look about how we think about ourselves as a business owner and what rights do we give ourselves. Right. We look at sorry, I'm being very quick because I know we've got 1 minute left. We look about the physical thing about what we can do. I'll be very, very practical here and very quick. So there are some very simple things that we can do as small business owners to help make our business sustainable. One of them is negotiate better. For example, we can actually, if you are supplying somebody with a service and you send your invoice and then they don't pay you for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and that's acceptable somehow, we know that for most businesses, that's a killer, particularly for small businesses. So having the confidence, having the assertive skills, having the negotiation skills, the physicality to actually go and negotiate with your suppliers, the people you're supplying to, and get some terms and get some agreements about that. The other side is, I'll just very quickly finish off these 2. The other side is the kind of emotional well-being, how we think about, how we feel about ourselves, about our businesses, about our rights. And the last one is our social and spiritual. And this is important because we've talked about networking and the importance of networking. But for many of us, and particularly I see a lot of young new businesses these days, there's a sense that I'm not just in this business to make money. I'm in this business because there is something bigger than me. And that something bigger than me informs how I make decisions about my business and about how I run my life. So this is the model that we've been introducing in terms of adding to the range of skills for entrepreneurs, particularly micro and small entrepreneurs. So it's not just business planning, marketing planning, digital skills, but it's also those core psychosocial skills that help to increase agency so that individual business owners, and particularly women business owners, can actually feel more able to take their business forward, to grow their business and to advocate for the business.
Thank you so much. So, Lenni, I want to ask you another question. How can young entrepreneurs, regardless of gender, support a more inclusive and equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem?
I think there are. I think the first thing is that gender equality is not a women's issue. Let's be really clear about that. It's something for everybody. And so we all have to be aware about it. It's also not about men bashing. It's not about making men feel uncomfortable so they don't feel that they can come and participate in the space to advocate for gender equality. And we really strongly love to see men in the space listening, talking, sharing. And that's really important, not to keep trying to segregate this or corral this off to be, oh, it's a women's issue, women should be dealing with it and it's nothing to do with men. It's about making it better for all of us. And whether that's about men also having access to bringing up their children, instead of leaving it in the domain of women being responsible for that and not considering what are the options available. I think it's about better and stronger networks. I think it's about listening and being curious. I think it's about challenging archaic practices. Just because it always has been doesn't mean it always needs to be. And we can actually stop and rethink that and have discussions on that. It's about putting your hand out to help other businesses. It's about paying it forward when you've been helped. It's about making sure that you contribute back, you give something back to others. And it's about creating partnerships with other like-minded entrepreneurs. That's where movements start. That's where change really happens. If we're all doing this in our little rooms or on our little screens individually, we don't create that movement. So it's about making those connections and making that movement happen. There are also some very simple things that you can do to shore up your own business. So there are stupid things like every time you earn an income, save 10%. It doesn't matter if it's €3 or $3, save 10% every single time. That will help you sustain your business. Negotiate with the people that you provide services or products to make sure that you are paid on time so that cash flow does not kill you. You know, I mean, there are lots of other things, but just think about creating sustainability for your own business and your reputation of your own business. Be a good business person in terms of make sure that the decisions that you are making are ethical decisions, because that does rebound back on your company. You know, if you have a reputation as a bad employer, if you have a reputation as a dishonest person or an untrustworthy person, that will affect you and your business, because, as I said before, for micro and small business owners, you are your business. So the actions that you take and the inactions that you take also reflect on you and your business.
Yes.
I don't know if you have many more questions, but I just wanted to add one thing which I really think it's important, and it goes back to my first point on bias. Be aware. I think that, to reply to your question, how can young entrepreneurs, regardless of gender, support and more inclusive, is be aware that we are all biased. Be aware that we all have internalized bias, and try to detach yourself. And that's very important for both women and men. So when you have to make a choice, if you're a man, maybe think about, am I being influenced by these stereotypes? Be aware that they are there somewhere in your deep brain, that's what they call the reptile brain, whatever. So just try to bring it up, because just being aware of that and stepping back sometimes and looking at the situation, look at the numbers, look at what's happening. Is this happening because this woman, don't we have enough women in our group because they don't like it? Or is it because there is something about us and in the way in which we operate that's excluding them? And the same goes for women in relation to men. And I think it's really important to kind of keep in mind that it's really necessary to renegotiate the gender pact, to be aware that there is, willing or not, we are all living in what is a gender pact, and be aware that it has an impact not only on our intimate relationships, but on the way in which we can then be in the public spaces. So we may like it, we may like to make a very traditional choice, but we need to be aware of what the impact is going to be. We need to be aware. And I think this is really important, because otherwise we'll never move on.
Yes, that's true. Thank you, Lenni and Benedetta. Now it's time for audience questions. If you haven't already, drop your questions in the chat now, and we will try to cover as many as we can. So let's see, what is the questions here?
I'm afraid we will only be able to take 1 or 2 questions, because we have another talk starting in 10 minutes, so we can take 2, but I will write down the questions and then we can also maybe answer them
happily.
By email.
Yeah, we'll happily respond to the questions afterwards if we don't have time. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Elodie. Absolutely. Let me say that it's also very important to network, not only, let's say, at an horizontal level, but also across the value chain of your business. And this is very strategic. Think about for instance, the partnership between Michelin-star chefs and food producers, how much you can benefit. And there has been some initiatives of the sort between women, female chefs, and women entrepreneurs, food producers, and that gives them a bigger, thank you for that comment, Elodie. And yes, fight against imposter syndrome.
Yes, let's see.
I would say that one question that I think is very interesting, and maybe it's a good way to wrap up, given we have not so much time. It's, what advice did you wish you had received before entering the world of entrepreneurship?
Lenni.
Oh, great question. Well, I think the first thing, I wish that somebody had told me the idea that you could manage your own time is a lie. So, and I know a lot of women make choices to go into running their own businesses because they think it's a good opportunity or a good way to balance family commitments and work commitments. But actually, I don't think for most of us that is a reality. I think those of us who are running our own businesses spend a lot more time. It just might be 2 o'clock in the morning rather than 9 o'clock in the morning. But I think that would have made a difference. I think I wish people had told me that sometimes it will be really hard and you can admit when it's really hard. I think I spent I've run with my husband, run a business three businesses for more than 25 years. But I think in that first 5 years, I don't know if it was pride or if it was something else, that when things were really, really difficult and I was really frightened, I didn't have anyone to turn to and tell. And I didn't feel that I could say, it wasn't okay to say, I'm really worrying. I don't think I can pay the bills this month, or I've got problems here, or I don't know how to handle this. So I think if somebody said to me, get a coach or a mentor, that would have helped me a lot, I think, at the beginning. And I have now, and we provide coaching and mentoring, but I certainly didn't do that in the early stages of running the businesses.
I totally agree. I think that someone could have told me, you can fail. It's okay to fail, but you can ask for help. Yeah. And having the possibility to get mentorship or coach or some kind of mentorship would have been great.
Yes, here Leo asked, how can society be more supportive of women entrepreneurs?
How can society be more supportive of women entrepreneurs? I think it goes back to some of the things that maybe we covered some of this a bit earlier before the question was asked. But I think the enabling framework is really important, whether that's at a local government level or whether that's a national government level. Society can certainly make a difference in terms of having small policies that recognise that women are still dealing with an unlevel playing field in terms of access to finance, access to capital, access to land, stereotypes, access to networks. So that could definitely make a difference. I think the other thing is entrepreneurship education could make a very big difference in terms of how is it viewed that setting up a business or going into a business or a type of business is acceptable for a woman? Is that something that families want their daughters to do? And so there's a lot of, we were working on a project in Lebanon, actually, which was really around family sensitization on 2 levels. One was, is it okay for our daughters to be involved in entrepreneurship training, setting up a business? But the other part of that was also, oh, well, why have I paid all this money for my daughter to go to university and you think she should be setting up a local business here? So there was kind of several different kind of cuts of prejudice about women in business. And I think another way is just generally celebrating women's success stories and enjoying success and recognizing hard work and success when it happens, rather than always. Often what we tend to do is talk about poor women and how terrible it is for us, and we don't spend enough time just celebrating what achievements we have actually made.
Yes, this has been such an insightful discussion, to be honest. Here are some key takeaways from today's talk. Invisible barriers still exist, from social norms to access to funding. Intersectionality matters. Women in rural and agri-food sector face additional challenges, unfortunately, of course. Networks, mentorship, and support system are crucial for success. So, Benedetta and Lenni, do you have any final words to advise for women starting their entrepreneurial journeys?
What else?
Yeah, I would say definitely, as I said before, every time you make any income, save 10%, because there'll be one day when your business doesn't have enough money in the bank and it will save you. Do that without a doubt. Go and get yourself a coach or a mentor, so that there's somebody there who can help you think about the options that you've got and the choices that you've got. Enjoy what you do.
And kill the policeman in your head.
Yeah, kill the policeman in your head. And whatever you do, do it with passion. If you're painting white lines in the road, it doesn't matter. Do it with passion. you know, do it with pride and passion, whatever you do, and that's where you will stay doing it. Don't turn it into a chore.
Yes, Benedetta and Lenni, thank you both for sharing your experiences and experiences. And a big thanks to everyone who joined today's discussion. Keep following us for more inspiring FoodBack talks. And thanks again for everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
we will
you.
share the PowerPoint.
Thank you so much.
We'll share the PowerPoint and we'll happily respond to the questions.
Bye.
Thank you,
You
everybody.
too. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.